All right. I'm live once again for Odinmade Hero, the programming series where I learn from Handmade Hero by Casey Muratori, where he demonstrates how to program a game from scratch in C and C++, but I'm doing it in the Odin programming language. So yesterday, we were deep into this pretty big change here to change the way we think about entities being active or dormant or high frequency or low frequency, and we were switching over to this notion of simulating the entities which are stored in some sort of storage format. We simulate them, and when we're simulating them, we bring them into this high frequency set or simulated set and do the simulations that we want to do, do the state changes that we want to do, and then once we're done, we convert them back into a stored entity format. And this change, the more we commit to it over the past few days, the better I like it and the more sense it makes to me. I think if I were to do all of this again in, let's say, a totally different programming language, it would really start to bring all of these concepts home for me and tie things together. But I don't, doing this twice is probably enough. I don't know that 3 times is really necessary. Most people will say it's ridiculous to even commit to doing a complete watch through even once, which I still haven't even done, right? I decided to start over from scratch because I decided that doing this in Odin felt like it would be more appropriate for just, the way that I like to do things and the way that I like to think about things. It was just feeling better. And then I had this notion to stream all of this, right? So there's a bunch of different things going on here that are making all of this unfold the way it has. But anyway, so one thing that did come up before we get started on day 65 was yesterday I was talking about using an enum rather than a raw union, and something like this might work, but what I realized after yesterday's stream was that it definitely should just be like a regular Odin union, right? And that way, instead of having these named members, we would just have a pointer to the sim entity and then the index, and whatever is stored in this union will be one of those two, and the syntax will look a little bit different than doing things this way. But I'm not going to worry about switching over to that until I'm sure this will actually work. I'm pretty sure it will, but I won't know for sure until we have the rest of the code changed and caught up with this simulation region concept. And so we have to get through today's code. So I don't know if I'll actually get around to trying this, but that'll be a nice opportunity to use an Odin union where I don't think I've used one before, at least not in this project. There's one other project I'm working on right now, kind of behind the scenes, where I might have a union, but I genuinely can't remember off the top of my head. So let's go ahead and jump into day 65, where we will wrap up the simulation region change.
Things going here. Hello everyone, welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live from scratch. No engine, no libraries, just our own code, and basically we're going through every bit of game technology, every last piece that goes into having a game run, right from filling the pixels to the highest level, like pathfinding AI stuff. We are doing absolutely everything so that we can kind of see every last detail that goes into how a game is made. And right now we're kind of in the middle of a big change. We are working our way towards having a solid engine architecture, and what we're doing right now is we are finishing a change that we made where we said, okay, we're going to have this concept of a simulation region so that we can have very, very large worlds that don't necessarily fit inside a single floating point variable, right, in terms of their spans. And so that we need more complex addressing to be able to support them. Very, very large worlds, and the ability to scale up to basically as many entities as you want. So we have 2 major scaling problems, and what we decided to do to address that was to basically simulate the world in little tiny regions so that we can do stuff like have one simulation region that we open every frame to simulate what's around the player, but then we can also simulate as many other places in the world at any given time as we want to by opening other simulation regions there, and we'll just do as many of those per frame as we can. And things that maybe don't need to be updated as frequently, that are further away from you, will get simulated less frequently. So this solves both of those problems, and it's our first architectural attempt at solving them, and we're hoping it works, but we don't really know yet. I'm still sick today, so there will be a bunch of nose blowing on the stream, and I apologize for that in advance. But you can't stop coding just because you're sick. The code wouldn't get done if we just took every little excuse to stop coding. That's just no good. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive right back into it. I should mention, if you have pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org using this little fancy button right here, and you would like to follow along at home with your own copy of the source code, you can do that. The link that you got in your email gives you access to the source code all the time. So download the zip file in there, and there'll be a bunch of zips in that file. You want day 64's zip file to start day 65. So we're on day 65, so unzip day 64 zip and start with that code. That is what I am starting with today, so you can follow along exactly if you would like. So today our job is basically to tidy things up and get to the point where we're running with the sim regions so that we can start debugging them. I don't know if we'll have enough time today to actually debug them or not, but it would be nice if we could get to the point where we've actually implemented everything that we need and are at least running, albeit perhaps running incorrectly. And that way next week we can start on just debugging and adding stuff and testing out sim regions and so on. So let's see. We were in the process of fixing compile errors. Basically, we made our bunch of changes, and we now have to move our sim code that we were used to be doing in our kind of janky way, our ad hoc way that we were doing before. It's now time to move those over into the simulation system that we were doing. Inside the simulation system, we've got a bunch of simulation code here. And what I'm thinking, I don't know, this is just my thought, is I probably am going to have a lot of code for entity stuff. And so what I'd like to do is probably make a file that just holds all of the behavioral code, so that anytime we want to add stuff that's about like how the game world operates, that kind of goes in one file. That's not in the sim region, which is basically like the utilities and the logic for doing the sim region itself. I think I'm going to keep those in separate files. Again, there's really no rhyme or reason to how you separate things file-wise. The way that we're doing things, it doesn't matter. You can pretty much put things in files however you want. So when I put things in different files, all I'm thinking about is just how I want to be able to quickly view them and how I want to kind of mentally compartmentalize them. It's a purely psychological thing. The files, it is not really a development thing, because the way we compile is everything's all one big chunk anyway. It doesn't really matter how you break it up into files. So I'm going to make something here like handmade. I guess, what are we going to call this? We'll call it handmade entity for now.
I think he does prefix literally everything with handmade, right? To kind of denote that everything belongs to the handmade game code, and we could certainly do something like that. One thing, and this is a convention that I've seen lots of people use with Odin, is that we don't have like a prefix that is specific to the package name. In this case, it would be game, which is what we declare this package to be. But we could do something like every single file where code, procedures, types are all grouped together under, like, for instance, the sim region stuff or entity stuff, which, like you just said, it looks like we're going to add an entity file here. To kind of denote that those things are in that file or belong to that group of procedures, you would prefix that collection of procedures and types with the name of the thing or the name of the file, right? So like anything that is entity related, you would just say entity update familiar, something like that. I've seen that quite a bit. I don't know if I really need to be that explicit or if I care to. It may be something that I just start doing organically as time goes on, but I'm not convinced that I need to do that yet. Maybe that's just because I haven't written enough code yet, but you know, we'll see.
Not sure if that's a good name or not, but that's what I'm going to call it, because it's basically like all of the code that you need to implement those entities. So put that in here. I don't think there's really anything for the H file at the moment. Really, we're just making those these sort of update calls. I'm going to move them in here. So those go in there. And then inside, let's see, inside the rest of this stuff, I think most of these things are going to be roughly the same. Our draw hit points code, I'm going to leave this code uncompiled for now, and we'll switch back to it in a second. Are all of these things that we're doing rendering. Rendering, I think, should just operate directly on the sim region. While the sim region is still open, we do our rendering. So we'll basically open a sim region for the world, for the place around the player, simulate it forwards, render it right in place, possibly doing the rendering and the simulation together, and then close it. Whereas with other sim regions, we won't do that. We won't basically output any rendering for it. How we want to deal with that is, again, something that we can just do a little bit further down the line. So what I want to do here is I want to change this over to be using the sim entities now, and because we now no longer ever work with low entities, basically the storage format for entities we just don't touch during real running of the game. Everything's supposed to be on sim entities except the unpack and the pack. So basically everything that was a low entity here is just an entity now, and that's really all that should have to happen as far as I know. There's nothing else fancy that should go on there. So
Kind of got confused because the entity was the first param in this procedure, but the group is still being passed in. It's just not it's not the first parameter, it's the second. So they're swapped, but then there's DT here, and I don't see DT actually in here. So maybe that was getting passed along erroneously. And then I see. So this if should actually be checking the entities. Well, actually, no. Yes? No? This should be checking whether the hit point max is greater than or equal to 1. That's kind of weird. Why was it checking the high entity index before? Maybe that was never supposed to be the thing. So that looks like that now, and I think we're good. And then let's see if I get rid of this. I didn't see it anywhere. So yeah, I must have been passing that along. Probably some kind of copy-paste nonsense that I did. And what is this? This is a move entity, right? Which I think we want to put into the entity file, but I don't know if I saw Casey do that, so I'll leave it there for now.
That should just work. And it did. Now in here, again, we don't have high entities anymore in the game state. That's not a thing. We just have the sort of the final stored entities in there. So we can get rid of the high entity count. That's gone. Anything that was initializing that array is not necessary anymore. So now what we have to...
Did he get rid of that altogether? No, so he just adds a plain low entity, and we can just get rid of that. I don't really know what this means. I guess because we added a nil world position, and therefore, well, what does that mean, actually? It just gets the null position, so then it never exists inside of a chunk, and then we never have to worry about skipping over the null entity when we're simulating regions. And I think that is a correct understanding here. Maybe that's wrong, but I think that's why we don't have to worry about skipping over the first high entity index anymore.
Thing that was initializing that array is not necessary anymore. So now what we have to do here is finally something that should have been done a long time ago. Well, no, it should have been done a long time ago, but rather that's been wrong for a long time, but we don't really have to deal with it. And that is updating the player, updating a hero. We had always kind of done that in an ad hoc fashion. We did that right in the code that parses the controller. Because again, and like I said, it should have been done a long time ago is really the wrong term. It wasn't that it should have been done a long time ago. It's that we kind of knew that we wanted to replace it for quite some time, but there really never was a need to. And you don't want to do stuff ahead of when there's a need to because you're liable to guess wrong. You always want to wait so you can actually see how things are going to go before you make changes like that. And so what we were doing here is we would process the controller input, and then immediately after processing the controller input, we would actually do the updating for the player. And that's not really what we want to do, right? We would like to probably do that. We'd like to probably do this in a way that's more sane. And the reason that we want to do that, again, is because excuse me. We don't actually know how this controller parsing stuff is going to work in the future. It's highly likely that we might do something where both multiple controllers update the same player, like both the keyboard and the gamepad are both controlling the same player, for example. Like if we ship the game single player only and not multiplayer, because we don't know whether we're going to support multiplayer or not, like we right now do, but we don't know whether that's actually going to be a gameplay feature. If it turns out that it's not, then we'll want to do something like bundle the controller stuff together and so on. Furthermore, processing the controller input is something that maybe we need some logic to do to like look at, maybe we change stuff. There's just a lot of stuff that goes on in there. So what we'd like to do is basically have the simulation for the hero happen in the same place as everything else, and the controller processing, to the extent that it happens, can either happen outside and build a little thing that it then passes on to the simulation code that says what should happen with the hero, or we actually just call out to the controller code in the hero processing and say get it now. I'm not sure which one we want to do, but either way, this stuff here obviously is simulation stuff and should happen inside the simulation part of things. So again, the other reason too is that there might be metagame stuff here in the controller stuff, meaning that like let's say we do have an option menu, we decide to have an options menu, or some kind of a confirmation for quitting. That stuff would sort of interrupt this processing, so we also have that concern. So a lot of that stuff just suggests to me that probably what I want to do, since I have to start splitting this apart, is I probably want to split apart the sim stuff, put it down inside where the rest of the sim stuff is, and then just have this get sort of passed, like the stuff that wants to happen, the controller just gets kind of passed down to the sim stuff. So when we do our entity type hero updating here, right, we can just stick in the code that we were using before for now.
Okay, so everything below and including this to do. This makes perfect sense to me. The more I was looking at this code in relationship to everything else, as we were making the simulation region change, the more it felt weird that the player was being moved here. It makes sense to process the input right off of the controllers because that's the only place where we're doing anything with the controller input or any of the game's input, but moving the player there just kind of seemed weird. Now we just pull all that over, and we are good.
And that's going to be how we'll do that. And then up here, when we do our controller parsing, what we'll do is we'll just save the stuff that we actually want to do for our hero, and we'll process that later on. Now, we set ourselves up for success perhaps accidentally. By having this player index for controller concept, we basically said for every controller in the system, we've got sort of a knowledge of what entity that maps to. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and expand that out. And so in addition to storing this entity reference, right? This is the entity index. In addition to storing that entity index, we're also going to store, along with it, the sort of control request that has been accumulated for that player on this frame. So we had this DDP request, right? Which is the acceleration that was wanted. And then we also had this sword request, which is whether they wanted to throw that sword, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and put those in there. And then later on, what we'll do is the heroes, when they get processed, they'll basically pick that up from the player index for controller array. Now, what I'd like to do, too, the other thing about that that's kind of, well, trying to think about this. One thing that's a little janky is for the individual players. Oh, well, you know what? That's okay. We can store that binding pretty well as well. So never mind. We'll deal with that a little bit later. All right. Because there's other stuff that we're going to need as well. All right, so when we go ahead and get this this player index for controller now, what I'm going to do is expand that out into this thing, which is basically like a controlled hero or something like that. So we'll have a controlled hero struct, and that's going to be one for every controller at the moment. So when we do the controlled hero, we're going to get one of those back, and this is the controlled hero right here. So there we go. Grab that out.
Okay. Forgot about this. This weird sort of nil cast to an input to get the length of the controllers, right? I don't feel like changing it even now. I feel like it's kind of silly that it works at all. What was that? Controlled hero. And just because it does, I'm going to leave it in there until, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I should probably just do this, right? Max controllers, something like that. But there's something about this that seems more big-brained to me. Or maybe smooth-brained. Maybe big and smooth. Sure.
And this is now, I guess, like just a controlled hero array. Controlled hero, like so. Or maybe I'll say controlled heroes. So we'll grab that out, and then assuming that controlled hero is has an entity index, right? Then we're going to do the control processing for it. Otherwise, we're going to do the same thing we were doing before. You know what? Maybe that's because it looks too close to controller. Let's do con hero like that. Makes it sound like he's a convict of some kind. Anyway,
I'm just going to call it a hero. I mean, what other kind of hero would they be if not a controlled hero, right? Maybe we just say heroes. Be very terse here, right? We just have some heroes. They all get controlled. And then again, like it's more like hero input or something. Like the controlled thing specifies the fact, the controlled descriptor here and the type specifies the fact that these are requests to manipulate the hero's state. So maybe the type can stay like that, but then we'll just use heroes because we've got limited screen real estate here as always, and I always have to try and be conscious of that. So it seems good enough for me. I don't know. So yeah, we get out the hero, get that controller index, and then we can start doing stuff with them. And over here, if the hero's entity index, is that right, is 0, then we do this stuff. This needs to go off of heroes, and I guess this should actually be hero entity index equals the new entity's low index. And at that point, I am stumped. I don't know what else to do, because I don't think this call is even necessary anymore, perhaps. We'll find out.
So if that happens, then all we have to do is just set up this stuff as we were doing before. So we'll record that entity index like so, and that's really all we have to do, although we could zero out as well his DDP request like so. In fact, I guess we could just zero this entirely like so. So just initialize it like that.
And it should already be zeroed out, so I don't think we need to do that. I'm kind of compelled to, again, until I'm convinced that I absolutely don't have to. It's just this sinking feeling I get that it'll be like a case where most of the time you would have 0 in that memory, but for whatever reason, maybe you wouldn't, particularly on a subsequent pass through of the game loop after you've already done stuff with the state because it's hanging around from before, but this is only on initialization, right? So it just doesn't make sense. Maybe, yeah, maybe if you had like controllers unplugging and then reconnecting, things like that. So we'll just leave it in there for now.
Add a player. And then similarly inside here, when we're actually doing work on the player now, instead the DDP stuff, we can basically just, change this so that we're actually doing it directly on the con hero. One of them, and I guess there's no, the request is just kind of going to be, now that I look at it for typing, might as well just leave them that way. We know their requests. We can even put a note. These are the controller requests for simulation.
Okay, that's fine. So I can't even go to this, can I? Game state, gosh, what is it? Heroes, there we go. So we'll say that type, these are implicitly requests. Controller requests for simulation. Okay, so now if we go back down here, I think we're just going to get rid of that altogether. This goes away, and then hero DDP Y, and we'll just change all of these. And then this right here, I think is just hero. Well, I don't know, the DZ thing. I'm not sure. Because we only have the index, we don't have, I mean, I guess this should just be added on to the controlled hero thing. And then this is just going to be hero D sword gets zeroed out. And then that should all be fine. Yeah, this is going to have to go on that controlled hero type, I think. And this should just be the DDP. And then I think we're pretty much there. We just have to add that DZ, but I'm going to make sure that Casey's actually going to do that before I commit to that.
Like so. Okay. So let's see here. Controlling entity, high DZ equals 3. Oh, so this was, we also have a DZ request, which is basically our old jumping command. I forgot we put jumping in there, even though we don't actually think we're ever going to allow this guy to jump. We still have jumping in there anyway. But, you know, it was kind of a fun thing. It allowed us to test some Z stuff, so we'll leave it in for now. Let's go ahead and change that stuff. And so now we've got all of those things in there. Looks pretty straightforward. So now, when we go down here and we're actually doing that simulation for the hero, what we can do, there's 2 ways we could do this. And I'm trying to think of which one I like best. I think, instead of doing it this way, basically what I'm trying to figure out is, so we've stored this now, and then what we want to do is when we actually process all of our entities, we want to go pick up those requests that the controllers put in. And kind of one of the nice things about that is now we can have as many things as we want sort of add in there. In fact, one thing that we could do is clear it first and then add into it here. Like we could just clear out these requests fields and then have these actually add into them, which would be kind of allow us to do the controller stuff as well. So maybe we'll do that in a second as well. But ignoring that for now, what I need to do is now go pick them up. So when I iterate over the entities, what I want to do is see if this particular entity, this particular hero that I'm on, has any controller requests. There's 2 ways I could do that. One way I can do that is have a mapping that allows me to get from the entity back to the controlled hero. Now, I can do that pretty simply with an array lookup because there's only like 4 or 5 of these ever in the system because there's only like, 4 or 5 controllers, separately controlled heroes on a single machine. But the other way I could do it is not doing with a lookup. I could do a loop over the controlled hero structures and look up the entities via their entity index and simulate them that way so that they get simulated first, right? That's one way to do it. And then when we actually get to them here, we wouldn't simulate them. So we would take the code out of here and just do it right here. Now, I don't actually know whether I, excuse me, I don't actually know what I think about that. I think what I'm going to do for now is keep everything in the same loop. That feels a little bit better to me, potentially. It just seems a little more rational. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to go ahead and do it right here. And then later on, I'm hoping that as we go further into the final code, like as we get further down the line, it'll become obvious at some point later in time how exactly we want to do this, right? So I don't want to overthink it right now, since looking through 4 elements in an array, or 5 elements in an array is so cheap. I think I'm just going to do that. And then later on, we'll see if there's a more elegant solution to the problem when things are a little more settled. So I'm going to go ahead and see about the control index here. I'm going to go through basically all of the controlled heroes, and I'm going to say, let's take a look at the controlled hero. Whichever one it was here. I don't know if you can hear it. It's so loud. There's so much construction here in Seattle. Like, they're building so many buildings. There's towers going up all around me. You can hear construction everywhere. All right. Anyway, so I'm just.
So I think that this is gonna be fine doing it this way instead of the other way where we pull the pointer to the hero out of the index that we're on in the loop. We'll find out if that's true or not. What is this? Oh, an advertisement popped up inside of my OBS that I have not seen before. Restream is trying to sell me a deal to add more channels at 50% off. I'm only using 2, but I've been thinking about using X, right, to stream as well, because I added that account and then I think I made one tweet and then I haven't looked at it again. But from what I've heard, word on the street is that more and more people are doing streaming and videos on X. So I wonder if that's like a sane place to go, because, and it seems like it's a more fitting format than, like, let's say TikTok, where there's no way that this barely works even on YouTube and Twitch. I don't know how it would be sane at all on TikTok. And you know what? To tell you the truth, I don't care to manage any more accounts that I'm already managing. But maybe I'll just do that because I already have an X account and like, I know how it works generally, and I have the extra account that I can stream to with Restream. So something to think about.
Just going to look and see if the entity index, right, of this con hero equals the entity's storage index, right? So basically, if this controlled hero is controlling the same hero that I am, then that's how I know how to actually do his move call. So once we get that con hero out, then I pretty much know all of the parameters that we were using before. They're just going to grab it right out of the con hero here. And then the only thing that I need to do that we didn't used to do in here, and of course we actually don't need any of this stuff anymore.
Okay, so real quick, just going to pull all of this into that branch. Clean that up a little bit, and then we can go ahead and make these same changes. So I think the hero D-sword fixes that. And then this over here, I suppose I should let him show us where this is going, because we've got all these old references to the controlling entity, but now, like, we just have that here, right? So I don't know, maybe I should just go ahead and make that change. And this is wrong because that takes, well, it takes a sim entity, and so maybe if we just pass it in by reference. Okay, never mind. Oh no, it's probably because it doesn't take a game state anymore. It takes the sim region. And this is probably already a pointer, or maybe not. It wasn't. Okay, so, and then that just becomes the hero acceleration. And then I think this might actually just work fine. And then the get low entity, how would this look? This would be like entity sword index. I think that's right. I'm afraid of these changes I'm making, so let's let Casey take the lead.
The low sword stuff, we can just get the sword directly, right? That's going to be entity sword equals, what's our sim region call? We need a, what is it? It's get entity by storage index. Oh, we don't even need to do that. We actually did a bunch of cool stuff here. We don't need to do any of this garbage, right? That's just done. All we need to do now is that we just take the entity, it just has a sword pointer, right? It just got one. That's it. So we just look to see if it's got a sword pointer.
Okay, yeah, that seemed kind of funky, like passing in this here. It should already be there by virtue of the fact that we're getting it out of the sim region. Like back when we do begin sim, right? Everything is just kind of baked into that region that we get back. And then I also did a defer end sim here because I realized that I don't know how much I've used defer elsewhere in this code base or how necessary it's even been elsewhere. I use it a bunch, I think, in the platform layer for like cleaning up windows and things like that. But I don't know if there's even really been another opportunity to use it here, except, well, I think in the load BMP code. It's not super exciting, but yeah, I think we just defer freeing that memory when we're reading the bitmaps in. So anyway, so yeah, this is just going to be pulled off of that pointer. So now we don't need to do that. And it's not a low sword, it's just a regular sword. And we ask if it's nil still, I suppose. Yep. And then I don't know about the is valid stuff. I really can't even remember if we got rid of that or not. We got rid of validate entity pairs, but I don't know about this.
If he has a sword at all, we're done. We don't have to do any of that stuff. We don't have to do any of this stuff. This is great. See how these sim regions are going to be...
So I guess we just don't need to do that, like he's saying, because it's valid by virtue of the fact that it was pulled in off of the entity, right? So its position has to be valid in that sense, unless it's not even in play. I don't know. That's weird because the sword can have a null position if it's not in play. But the pointer won't be nil. The pointer will always be around. So I guess there's that.
So good. So people weren't so sure about the sim regions. I understand your apprehension. We're doing a lot of tricky things with the code, or trying to do a lot of tricky things, and it's hard to make them all to satisfy all the constraints. Again, we are picking intentionally much harder problems than we need to solve so that we can show how to do them. But it's really cool when stuff works out, when you can satisfy those constraints and still make the code simple, and I really do think we're getting closer there. It's not going to be the final thing, right? Like, probably a little bit further down the line, we'll have another epiphany, and we'll all be like, we can do this cooler thing that's even more cool with the way the sim regions work, or replace it with this better concept. But, you know, you can't always jump right to the end. You have to kind of go through that process, and that's one of the big things I wanted to show on the stream, was going through that process.
Oh, no. What did I do? I closed Casey again.
So people could see that that's how it is. A lot of times you read something on the web and they're like, here's how we solve the problem, and they just show the solution. But that doesn't help you get better at solving your own new problems. And so this is really the kind of thing that I want to do. And look at how nice this is coming out now. Now you just use pointers. You can just point to things directly, which is how you would want to write it originally, instead of having all of these low, high indices that you had to manage. And so what we're doing here is we're getting back to the nice, simple way of programming while still satisfying all the constraints that we had, which, you know, were pretty tough, that sort of imply you can't use pointers and that you can't use floats and that sort of thing. We're getting that back while still retaining the things that would have caused us not to be able to use those originally. And that...
I'm totally on the same page as him, and now more than ever, because I remember doing this in Zig, right, as I will always mention. I remember just being in the place where I was mentally overwhelmed by making all of this change, and it's also opaque because you're not actually seeing things happening with the game. Like, you can't test and run the game in the middle of making all these changes, so you're just kind of moving in this direction and trying to trust the process that this is all going to wind up in a better state. But now, like, after going through the pain of writing out all of that high and low index stuff and then getting it back to this place, like, you can obviously tell that the code is better when you don't have to do all that stuff, but to be able to appreciate why all of that was necessary, making all the changes, like, yeah, we made all this change just to get back to this place where we can just call an entity's sword, right, and then start doing stuff, and we're not, you know, dealing with all these high and low indexes. It's just much more ingrained and retained at this point, I think. And, you know, maybe that's just because I'm a slow learner, and maybe that would be just totally obvious to somebody who is completely approaching all of this from a place of ignorance, right? Maybe other people pick up on this stuff a lot more quickly than I do, but maybe it's not even that. It's just, it's so niche. And if you're interested in the stuff that Casey is talking about, a lot of this is already more intuitive to you by virtue of the fact that you're going out of your way to listen to him. But that's not me. I'm not that guy. Like, I never had an interest in making games growing up, and it became like a passing interest over the past not over the past few years when I first initially got into programming, but then you read all this stuff about how the games industry is a meat grinder for developers, and I thought, I don't really know if I want to entertain that, and so that's why I never really went down that path. But to kind of go down it now, even if it's as a hobbyist or something like that, you know, where I never seriously get to a point where I want to release a game on Steam or something like that. I don't know. It's a deep subject, and it's fun to learn about this stuff. Devil said also depends on if your Wi-Fi can handle a third stream. That's the great part about Restream, actually, is that I only need to stream to one destination, and then Restream takes my stream and then outputs it to all the different platforms. So I can actually stream to however many, but I'd have to pay more, pay Restream more. I think it's like $10 a month or something right now that I'm paying them just to be able to stream to both YouTube and Twitch. And it wouldn't cost me anything extra, and there wouldn't be any like technical restraints for me to be able to stream to both, all of those in X. Great, a spam call. Both of those in X, so I'd be able to stream to all three. But my Wi-Fi bandwidth, I'll tell you right now, my Wi-Fi bandwidth cannot handle streaming to both YouTube and Twitch right now. Like, I'm basically using the max bit rate that my Wi-Fi can handle. And I looked into this initially when I was starting the stream. I was like, do I want to try and figure out how to stream to both from my machine? And I quickly discovered that my Wi-Fi wouldn't be able to handle that. But one thing that I came across a lot was Restream, and then it was like, well, do I want to pay the money? And it turns out it's been well worth it. The first stream, I was regretting everything. The very first stream, because I think Restream dropped the connection, and it may have been because I had it configured to just use like an auto picked server, right? So maybe it picked the wrong server, but it dropped like 10 times that first stream, and I was like, well, this clearly isn't going to work. I'm going to have to give up before I even really get started here. And then I just hard set the server to be in like Seattle or something, and it's been relatively fine ever since. So pretty happy with it. Hoping that it holds up. But yeah, the whole X thing, I don't know. I'll toy around with the idea, and I'll look into how much trouble it would be to add that. But that might be another good way to reach new people that otherwise would never find content like this, right? Not that there's a whole lot of people going out of their way, but I do know that I've seen programming content just get more and more pervasive online, and that could just be a consequence of more and more people getting into that career over the last 5-10 years. But we now may be in a place where we're kind of sliding back in the other direction. It's been that way for probably like a year or two, right? But there will come another, the pendulum will swing the other way, and it'll become fashionable again, and the job market will start getting hot again. And at that point, you'll probably see even more content come up around different programming topics. But anyways, I doubt I'm going to be able to make it to the end of today's episode. Well, actually, I still have about an hour, so we'll see how it goes. Let's just keep chugging along.
It's exactly what we want, right? We want to get back to having the simplest possible code be totally just writable, while still having all of these things that you wouldn't have gotten if you had just written that simple code. And I think that's what the sim region is starting to let us do, and I'm really excited about that. So we don't care about any of this stuff now. It's just this, right? But we need to, I guess we still need to set its position like so. So basically, the entity's position and the sword's position are going to get set like so. And we don't care about this at all. So that is how that works. Oops. And then we also have to put our jump stuff in there. Here's our hero. We have to put our jump stuff in there. Which is to say that in addition to moving the entity there, we had a thing where we said we wanted a DZ. And so I think that's just on the entity as well. So there's a DZ. So we'll go ahead and set that. Now, yeah, we didn't actually have any logic for our jump code yet, so that's okay. That'll just stay the way it is.
That is so much cleaner. It's kind of hard to believe that it can look this nice now. We've got our D-sword velocity X and Y. We check if either of those are not 0. So then we just go ahead and get the sword out, or a pointer to it anyway, and then we update its position. That is not... What is this? Where did this come from? I'm not getting an error, but I'm pretty sure this is just supposed to be the P. Oh, I'm declaring it. Oh, okay. Okay. So, yeah, we were declaring it. Duh. Huh. That's like the one instance where this gopher operator, I call it that just because I'm familiar with Go, and having seen, I first saw this declaration syntax in Go, and now I just attribute that to gophers and whatnot. So that's the first time where that, because it's so subtle, I just didn't catch that I was actually declaring this. I was looking for this definition elsewhere, right? Whereas normally my brain has been kind of conditioned to like look for a var and then like the colon and then, the type, whatever, that sort of thing. But anyway, there have been plenty of other times where I just catch it right away because OLS will tell me, but there actually isn't an error here, right? So then we're just assigning this P. Anyway, it's kind of a nothing, whole lot of nothing, but Just interesting. First time that's tripped me up like that.
And let's see what's going on here. So this stuff, that goes away. Sim region. Sim arena is undeclared.
So what was that? That was the DDP somewhere. I must have already gotten rid of that. Oh, no, well, that's where he zeroed it out. But I guess... Yeah, why would he get rid of that?
Yeah, so that's okay. That'll just stay the way it is. And let's see what's going on here. So this stuff, that goes away.
Oh, no, he just deleted that other call. So all of this looks fine. But if we go over here... Yeah, he was just getting rid of this line, which we already commented out.
Sim region. Sim arena is undeclared. That's true. We haven't dealt with that yet, so we'll deal with that a little bit later. Entity, undeclared identifier. That's a sim entity, obviously. High entity is...
So now he's just kind of stepping through his compiler errors. I'm going to see what I've got going on. Okay, so there's the draw hit points thing, which I think for whatever reason... Yeah, that's weird. Why was DT ever being passed in there? Oh well. And then we were doing it elsewhere too. Yeah, anywhere. So just the monster and the player, I guess, is where we were using that. And then what is this? This is probably oh, the change entity location. Is this in the move entity code? I think so. So we have the new P coming back from this, but what the game state, well, where is that going to come from now? Because we go to the procedure definition. Is the state on the region? The world is on the region. Yeah, maybe I should wait for him to catch up to that point. But this stuff right here, low doesn't exist. Do we even need change entity location anymore? Yeah, we do. We definitely do. But it should be the stored entity, which I don't know if we're going to want to grab that out. Yeah, I should wait to see what Casey does with that.
It's not, and we don't need any of this anymore. That goes away. We're strictly working on the things in the sim region, right? High entity Z, that's just going to be entity.
I guess I didn't see what he changed just then. Was that... Oh, that was getting the low entities out when doing the render group stuff. Which I think... Yeah, we got rid of that.
High entity is not, and we don't need any of this anymore. That goes away. We're strictly working on the things in the sim region, right? High entity Z, that's just going to be entity Z. Let's take a look here. This is just going to be the facing direction. Again, all of these things just get simplified. It's now just, again, looking a lot more like the code you could just write directly if you didn't have to worry about all these ancillary constraints, which again is really good. I think that's what I wanted, and we're starting to get there. So let's see, controlling entity, undeclared identifier. So this is just the entity that we're on, that we're simulating. Getting down, last two compile errors. Looking good, people. So the move entity call, we need to pass the sim region to that, right? Let's see, function does not take 6 arguments. How many does it take? Move entity, sim region, move entity. It takes the sim region, doesn't take the game state, that's all. Okay. So we have our sword. That's another sim entity. I keep calling it entity. I'm thinking the fact that I type entity so often suggests to me that I probably should just rename sim entity to entity. Because it's our primary entity type now, and like I was trying to be a little more clear about the fact that it was for the sim region only, but that's the only place we're ever going to operate entities. Everything else is just for entity storage, so I probably should just rename it entity. Because that's what I type all the time, and you see me type it so many times instead of the right thing. I feel like we should probably say that this should just become entity. So let's do what to do, Casey. Rename sim entity to entity, right? All right, so we've got that arena stuff to deal with, which we're going to deal with. I want to keep that to the end because I want to talk about that a little bit. For drawing the hit points, I think we still just draw just the entity itself. Update sword and update familiar are the two update, and also update monster are the things that we have to actually go and do. Now these are all of this stuff is off the entity itself, like so. And there we go. Let's see here. Anything else? Update Monstar. This is just going to draw the hit points. So I think we're all good. I think we're down to just the sim arena and the 2 update calls. So now to get those update calls in, I'm just going to go ahead and take...
I'm going to make sure... Oh, no. He doesn't have... Did he change that code? Did he somehow already fix these calls? What did he do with them? I never saw him mess with that. Uh-oh. Oh, and then there's init hit point stuff. Okay, so there's still a few things that I need to clean up myself. Oh, an entity. Here we need to import the math package. And we also need to import the linalg package. Oh, is that like a sub package of math? Yeah. So then if we go back here, do we still need these imports? Some of these might go away. I don't know if we're using linalgebra anywhere else. I guess we are in the move entity code. But again, I don't know if that code's going to go. Oh, yeah. No, I think he's going to get new errors. Okay, I think we're okay. He's going to get new errors when he includes the entity file here in the main code. So we just saw those ahead of time because of the way Odin compilation works. Okay. So let's get this init hit points stuff dealt with real quick. Init hit points, that should just be, oh, that should be off the sim. Okay. Wait, what? Cannot, what? It takes a pointer, and is that just stored? Okay. So we pass it in by reference and we're good? Hopefully. And I think that's the only two places where that's done. Yeah, so the map into chunks, he must have put the move entity code into the entity file, which makes perfect sense, but I only saw him move the update code in there, so I must have just missed it. So yeah, I think that just leaves, excuse me, the my voice is just going right now. I think that just leaves, let's just rebuild this again. So the move entity code in yeah, everywhere that's being called, we're doing something. Why are we doing this in 3 different ways? How could this happen? Entity, distance remaining. Yeah, that's right, because we had a procedure parameter that we were trying to update. Hopefully that'll just become a pointer. Get low entity state. Okay, let's go into that entity code and see what is going on there. Yeah, why is this just state? Can I at least get that part right? Yeah. So yeah, I think everything is just in here. I think Casey's gonna have to work through this stuff right after he includes the file. So
that I had that handmade entity, right? I've got those in here. I'm gonna go ahead and bring those into the build by pound including them, right? Like so. Like I said, we compile everything just as one chunk. We don't compile multiple files. So I'm just gonna go ahead and bring those in.
Oh,
now
yeah.
they're in. And so now we just have to port this old code that we had. And
he's got a whole bunch of errors there you can see on the right side of his monitor. But what I'm curious about is I still don't see the move entity code. So yeah, I guess I'll just let him work through these. Some of these are our problem too, right? So
for now, I think that should just work. We don't really need the game state anymore. I think we just use the sim region, right, like so. And then we've got our sim entity like this. And then the entity, we don't need to sort of grab it anymore.
Awesome. And it is a pointer, which makes total sense to me because it's no longer bundling the pointer to the actual thing. And so that might actually just solve my whole issue with a lot of these errors, and I can kind of move ahead here. So that is no longer needing to be passed by reference because it's already a pointer. Over here, we just need to change the definition of all of these, or the signature of all of these, so that it takes a pointer. And then same thing, like with the familiar call, this just takes in the region. And then instead of the state, move entity takes the region, and that looks good. And then there's this, but yeah, if we need to get the low entity out, maybe we don't need to do this. Maybe we can just call this, right? Because we don't have the low entity. Well, I don't know. I should not assume, but I feel like this is just not the way this is going to go again. So let's see if that really cuts down on the number of problems that we're having. I get the feeling that Casey's going to have to spend a good amount of time debugging, because it looks like we're just about done, but he's got there's quite a bit of time left in the episode, so we're going to be sitting here with him debugging for a bit. Some of these are still back in main here. Yeah, and that move entity code. If we go back to here, I just want to get all of the stuff out of the way that is not really relevant, right? So like this is just a gimme. This is, what's going on there? What? Oh, well, we can just pass it in by reference, right? Yeah. And then there's no update player call, but I assume that's what this should really be at some point. And then down here, same thing. That takes reference, and that takes the region. What? Did I not update that call? I did not. Okay, so now we might just be down to the last few errors here. So we have the ones in entity, and then the ones at the bottom of that move entity code, which again, I never saw Casey fix that, so I feel like he must have fixed it yesterday when I wasn't paying attention. And if so, that's messed up, because I have no idea. I mean, this being the previous camera position, wouldn't it just be like the region's origin? I think that's right. And then this one is just weird. I don't know. I might have to go and actually look at the source to see what he did there.
More, the familiar is looping over everything in that sim region. So this is just going to be a test entity index, right? This is looping over everything. And this is not probably how we want to do it eventually. So we want to put a to-do in here that says, make spatial queries easy for things, so that we can do a spatial query here and not have to go through this loop sort of stuff. But again, that's a little premature, because we haven't quite gotten to too much of our logic stuff yet in the entities. So basically, we have a test entity that's going to start at the beginning of the sim region entities, and then we're just going to go through all of the entities that are in there, just a whole entity count, and it's going to look for anything that it thinks it might want to follow. That's how our familiar was working. And again, we just want to, the reason I'm marking that is because we don't want to loop over all the entities ever, really, even in the sim region. For an individual, we want to be able to call some queries that we can accelerate, because we know lots of people are going to want to do that, and we just want to make that all kind of consolidated into one place so that we can speed it up when the time comes to kind of get perf out of it and so on. But, all right, so when we do this, we've got our update familiar call. It was looping over those things. At that point, we had a closest hero. The closest hero is just going to be a pointer now, because we don't need to store lows and highs and all this other garbage, which again is great. I really like how this is cleaning up. We have the closest hero d squared. We're doing all the same checks just to see. And I think we did do pull speed out of move entity. That's the move spec thing. So we did do that. So that's good. And I think that's about it. So that just has to call the move entity call to update his position. Excuse me. That looks about right. Let's take a look. Again, that sim entity. I'm going to enjoy renaming that. I think I'm going to enjoy renaming that. These get rid of those high pointers. So again, all we're really doing is deleting the old code that was dealing with that crufty combination of things. So default move spec, we gotta, I think that's still in here. We want to move that out, and that's just going to be entity data there, basically. So we'll leave that in there. Update Monstar, we haven't written yet, so that's pretty easy, but it'll take the sim region for sure. It'll basically just look at the same as the other calls, like this. Sim entity. We had our sword code, which basically moved the sword, right? There was nothing particularly odd going on there. And this stuff, we basically had a way that it could become, after a while, it would not exist anymore for all intents and purposes. And so we don't really have that concept yet. So we'll have to deal with that.
Did he get rid of that get low entity call? Where did that call go? He didn't even have it. Okay, well, we didn't need to use it for the sword anymore, even before making this call. And it was weird that it was being made both in that the code that was calling this procedure and inside of this procedure. So that definitely seemed wrong anyways. Oh no. Well, we'll just see. We'll see what happens, I guess.
We don't really have that concept yet, so we'll have to deal with that maybe as the first thing, maybe as a kind of the next thing that we do in terms of tracking entities in the sim region. right? We need some way. In fact, you know what I'll do? I'll just place an assert in here. Assert need to make entities be able to not be there. I don't know. Not sure what we'll call that. You know what I'm saying, though. All right. So let's see. Entity high P. Don't need high no mo. There we go. And entity low we don't need anymore either. That's all in there. All right. All right. So I think that's good. These all take the sim region now. Sim region. Sim region. And I think we're now back to where we were. Okay.
Just want to make sure I got this right. So the move spec. Oh. What was the default? Oh, I never even changed that. But yeah, that's right. Because it didn't make sense to. Yeah, that I just kind of forgot that this needed to be changed. It's just kind of weird. Because getting the default and then overriding all of the defaults just seems off. But then we just set, and everything else is zeroed out. Like the unit max acceleration vector is already false. The drag is already 0. So we just need to overwrite the speed to be 0. And then that is exactly what he's doing there. And then we get the old position out. We move the entity. We get the distance traveled. And then we update the entity's distance remaining. And then we have our panic once the distance remaining is less than 0. Okay.
All right. All right. So I think that's good. These all take the sim region now. Sim region. Sim region. And I think we're now back to where we were. Okay. So we have a couple things that we still have to do. So inside our handmade sim region, we do have some to-dos that have to get done. These two right here, we got to clear the hash table, and then we have to work on that apron stuff, which will also dovetail with the sword thing. But first things first, we now need a place to store the stuff that we do in the sim region. And this is the first time that I'm going to introduce this, so I thought I might take a second and talk about it, just so it's clear, right? I'm going to blow my nose first. Oh, sickness.
Mute yourself, man. Okay. Okay, so he's going to get into creating this sim arena, and for now, I'm just using the temp allocator, right? But I think what we will do at this point is probably override the temp allocator using the game states using the game states transient storage, which we will convert into a virtual arena in pretty much the same exact way we're doing for the permanent storage. But I need to actually go back and look at that code. I think it'll all look exactly the same, and I think it'll all work out fine. But we may need to like do I can't remember. I think you can just like basically delete everything on the temp allocator. And what we would do is then I think defer doing that. Like free all the memory that gets used in this, right? So that it all gets cleared to 0, hopefully, I think, is what I would hope that will do. But just, yeah, no longer have anything. Because I don't think, I was speculating on stream the past couple of days that I think that will be done for us for free, but I don't know that that's true. There's just some nuance here that I'm not totally kind of ingrained into the way I think about how Odin's context allocators work. So, but there's that, and then there's the fact that like this really bothers me, that I never saw how he fixed this here. But let's just see. I mean, if it's not, what does this take? This takes the world position. Maybe we don't even need to do this here. I genuinely don't know. I wish I could get a glance at that move entity code, because he's just not getting an error here, and I don't know what he changed. But if that is a world position, and it is, then I wonder if, do we get the low entity out anywhere else in here? We just have its storage index. So maybe what we do, because I'm not sure what else to do about this, is we get the low entities, get the low entity at the entities storage index, or maybe, yeah, like I was saying, we could just call the raw form of this, but we weren't doing that before, so it just seems wrong to do that. And that'll give us that. Oh, and we don't have the state. Yeah. I don't know. I really don't know. Well, is that happening in NSim? That should be in the sim file. End sim. Does change entity location happen here? It does. So I think, yeah, and the map into chunk space happens too. So we must have just deleted that. I think I'm just going to comment that out and then not think about it anymore. And if it comes back to bite me, then I'll deal with it then. But I don't think it's a problem. So let's get rid of that. And then this, yeah, we'll just comment all this out. I think we'll be good to delete that, but I want to make sure before I actually do it.
All right. So here we are on day 65, right, which is 65 hours into the coding of Handmade Hero. Still haven't gotten to 2 weeks of coding yet. So we're actually very early in the development of this game, if you think about it. 2 weeks of coding is hardly any coding. Most games have many man weeks of developing in them. So here we are on basically what is hour 65 or so. We had a couple extra hours in there somewhere, so it's probably more like hour 69 or 70. But if you will remember, way back at the beginning, I said we have 2 memory blocks. And in fact, I'll draw them separately because the game doesn't actually know if they're even continuous, right? We have the permanent store. I'm going to write this on this side. We have the permanent block, right? Did I spell that right? It's in E, right? Yeah, permanent block. And we have the transient block. Now, so far, we've only ever used the permanent block, right? And we put like our entities in there, right? And we put our game state in there. And it makes sense, right? Because that's the stuff that actually needs to persist from frame to frame. And if we were going to save the game, most of it would be stuff that we'd save as well. Although I don't know that we'd save it out as a block, but you know. But we never used this. And you might ask, like, why was it there? And the answer is because now we're actually starting to get into pieces of code that are going to want it. What the transient block is for is a transient block is just a scratch pad, essentially, where things that only are used for calculation go. And so what we do is we're going to divide this up in some ways, right, into basically chunks. And what we're going to do is during processing of a frame, we're going to allow things to essentially just grab a region of it, use it to do all their calculations, and then get rid of it all when it's done, right? So it's basically just a scratch pad, right, for this sort of thing. So the sim arena is the sim region is a perfect example of how this would work. What we can do is we can just grab a pointer to a chunk. The sim region can just start throwing things into that chunk as much as it wants. Then when it's done, we just vaporize it. We just say the whole thing's gone, right? So it's basically just a stack that gets cleared at the end of the processing. And again, the reason that I think this is so important is because a lot of people, the overwhelming majority of people, write code that's basically like this spider web of pointers, right? They write code where they've got, you know, the entity has like pointers to other entities, right? And then like they've got pointers to like their sim state or something, and then like there's like, you know, all of this stuff, and then there's the tiles, right? And those point entities and all these sorts of things, and they allocate, when they allocate stuff, they allocate it, create these sort of morasses, and then when they free it, they walk them and they do these frees. Okay, this guy free, you know, this guy says free, so he tells this guy to free, and then this guy says to free this guy, and then it walks back up and all this sort of stuff, right? And they do that whether it's permanent stuff or not, right? So they write this kind of code where you're doing this kind of crazy destruction, even if all of this stuff was only transient for a bunch of computations, like in the case of the sim region, where all of it's only there just to do our calculations. What you'd much rather do is do all of this stuff in a scratch pad. So this is all in some memory segment somewhere, right? Where you do it all, and then you never have to care about crawling this list again. You never, during shutdown, there's nothing to shut down. You just say it all goes away, bam, gone. And that way there's no allocation cost and there's no deallocation cost. They're just gone, right? Allocation is just incrementing an integer, and deallocation is nothing. There's literally nothing. You just don't think about the region anymore. There's nothing to it, right? And that's really a much better way to write this kind of code. You can't leak memory anymore, and you pay no cost, no performance cost for it. So anything that you can write in this fashion, you want to. The only time you should ever write that morass spidery crawly thing is if you actually need that functionality to be able to delete just a small portion of collected entities or stuff like that. And the vast majority of systems don't need that functionality. So you're paying all this cost. And this is true whether you're in C or in a garbage collected language. In a garbage collected language, that's where all your garbage collector perf goes, right? Is if you write this code that is doing all of this sort of spidery pointer stuff, and the garbage collector is then responsible for trying to figure out how it all gets pulled back out again when you're done with it, that's that same cost, right? So it doesn't matter what language you're in, these costs are real. It's just whether you wrote code that does it or whether you let the garbage collector do it. But in either case, it's work that the CPU should not be doing, and so we don't want to do it. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to make a memory arena, right? Because you remember we have these memory arenas. And we're going to initialize this sim arena. We'll do some more fancier stuff with this later, but since this is the only thing that uses our transient thing yet, sorry, I should put that here. Since this is the only thing that uses our transient arena, we don't have to do anything special just yet. So what we're going to do is initialize that sim arena. We're going to initialize it to the transient arena's location, basically, right? And I can't remember what that was actually called. So let's take a look in the memory section. What was it called? It was called transient storage and transient storage size, right? Like so. So yeah, so I just want to go ahead and initialize that arena, and I'm going to go ahead and give it the entire space, like so. And then everything can just allocate off of that. And when we're done, we literally don't, at this point, have to do anything. Because basically, when we're done, we're done. We just return back to the platform code, and the next time through, we'll initialize the sim arena to point to the bottom of transient memory again. No cleanup at all, right? There's just no cleanup at all. So in theory, that's all we need to do for now. There'll be a little bit more stuff about partitioning later when we have more things using the transient area, but for now, that's really it. So that's all we need to do.
Okay, so assuming that is true and that is all we need to do, I can kind of give you a look at how I'm thinking about this and how I think this is the correct way to think about this, because he's basically doing the same thing that we did for the World Arena, but the Sim Arena is not on the game state, so it just gets declared right here because it's going to be a new one every single time, which is why it makes perfect sense to me that this would be the analog to using the temp allocator, but maybe that's wrong. Maybe I'm incorrect in that assessment, but so we just do another arena init buffer and pass in the transient storage, which has a known size, right? Because it's a slice. So we've got the bounds on that. So we don't have to pass in the storage size the way that Casey does, which kind of implies to me that maybe we can just take those size members off of the game memory, but maybe it makes sense to keep those on for the time being. And then, geez, what is going on with my voice? Too much talking. And then you take the arena allocator call, and this time we're gonna pass in a reference to the sim arena that we just created using the memory's transient storage, and then assign that to the temp allocator. We also get the variable out itself so that we can pass it to the begin sim call. And then I still have this to do in here because I don't know exactly what clearing the temp allocator looks like, but hopefully that'll be straightforward enough. It might be that not doing this just breaks things. In fact, if I just do this, what happens? Cannot assign value temp allocator of type allocator. So yeah, however I'm doing that, I need to figure out the correct way to do that. Otherwise, we may just use the default temp allocator until I can get this all hooked up correctly. But even then, I mean, if you're still using the temp allocator, maybe this will just happen implicitly, and maybe I don't have to actually clear that. But I want to make sure that that's being done regardless. However, whether I need to do it myself or it's happening implicitly. But I think that's pretty much it. Kind of like Case said, that's all we need to do, and I think that'll work fine. One thing, though, that I noticed is that over here, when we do it for the World Arena, I'm creating this allocator that we never use outside of when we assign it to the context, so I can just do that and get rid of that. Or maybe not. Well, yeah, because we don't have to declare it. And so, yeah, that actually works fine. And then the enumerated array thing that came up a long time ago, I noticed that I still have a to-do in here for that. To use an enumerated array for the buttons and their state. And we already made that change, but I never got rid of the to-do. So there's that, and I think we're good now.
What is this complaining about? Transient storage. I see. This should really take a void star, so that you can pass any kind of memory you want, and then it'll just do its cast, since it's the thing that wants it in a UNA. So we'll fix that. Begin sim. I don't actually remember what this takes, so let's take a look. Begin sim. It is sim arena game state, which I think I said I would like to not pass anymore eventually, but the problem is the low entities are stored there. And then that's it. All right, begin sim must return a value. That's true. It must return the sim region. And add entity must return a value. That is true. It should return the entity that it allocated. All right, so we got to do a couple things.
Okay, so if I go, I want to make sure that I actually have that call wired up correctly. I'm pretty sure I do. I would have hit a compiler error otherwise. Yeah. So what happens if I try and run this thing? We only have one error, and that is in the main game code. at line 548 because we're not using that game world anymore. And so we can just run and probably explode. Yeah, tried to draw the null entity. So let's see if Casey has that same problem. And if he does, then we're in business.
Things here, I think the only one we want to do right now is clear that hash table, but then we have to go through and step through this stuff, and basically we've done a pretty major code change. I'm sure we've made a bunch of mistakes, especially because we had to do it over, normally I would do this whole code change in the space of one block of time at work, but since we only have an hour per stream and I'm talking the whole time, a lot of times we have to spread it out across multiple days, and because of that, we may have made some oversights where like I forgot to change something, or we said we were going to change something and didn't. So we definitely need to kind of go through now what all the stuff we did. Maybe we'll step through everything once and just remind ourselves whether we've done everything that we thought we were going to do, whether we actually implemented it or whether we just cheesed it out before we start debugging in earnest, because that I think it's just going to be a good idea to just make sure there was nothing obvious that we left out and remind ourselves all the stuff that we changed. So when we do this push struct here, I'm pretty sure that push struct won't clear that hash table for us, although let's double check and see if it does. Well, the hash is actually in there directly, so let's take a look here. Handmade.h. Let's see about the push struct. Push struct does a push size, and push size doesn't do a clear. So we want to do a clear here, and we don't actually have a clear call yet. So I think I might do an inline clear call. Also, these are all should be inlines. They don't do anything. So these will be things that should be put straight into the code probably. So I'm going to do a 0 size call, basically. Something that just takes a pointer, right, and a size, and just clears it, right? So it's basically something that just says, while there is some size left to do, just clear it, like so. So we basically have u8 star byte equals pointer, and this is something that we probably will do a bunch of. So check this guy for performance, because we may want to write zeros in bigger blocks, and we might want to do some fancier stuff there eventually if this ends up being something that we call in a bunch of places to clear things to 0, right? So that's just something that we want to be able to do, right? So all I'm doing here is I'm just spinning over all of the bytes, right, one at a time in whatever block this is, clearing them to 0, and that's it, right? So if this comes in and size was already 0, it'll do a while size is 0, so it just won't enter this loop at all. If it does enter the loop, it'll decrement it each time through until it gets to 0 and clear as many bytes as are there. All right, so what I want to do is I want to 0 size this guy, this hash, right? And so what I think I'm going to do is just make a convenient thing, since I want to do that occasionally. I want to do something where I can just do 0 struct, right? And I can pass something that I want zeroed like this. So I can just say, oh, okay, clear that whole hash out, right? So what I want to do is do a pound define 0 struct, just like we did up here, which is just a macro that takes some instance of a struct, right? And basically it just says, okay, what I want you to do is call 0 size. I don't need that semicolon. Call 0 size with just whatever the size of the thing is that we're talking about, and then the address of it. So just clear it out as a whole block, right? And that'll work to do that clear. So that'll clear our hash.
Okay, so I think all I have to do here, rename this to just allocator, because we're not passing in multiple allocators here, so it's clear what we're doing. So we do that, but he wants to zero it out before starting to write some of this stuff. And I mean, I don't think we need to do anything besides, what is it? Well, the sim region is the result. So, I mean, is it literally just that? I mean, this is effectively what we're doing already. Right? This is already being done implicitly when we do this. Everything else that we wouldn't be, I mean, I think we are assigning every single field here that is even on, well, maybe not every single field, just about. But it's specifically the hash. What even happens with that hash? Yeah, it's just 0 initialized by virtue of the fact that we do this the way we're doing it. So thanks, Odin. I don't need to do that. I also looked at the Odin overview real quick, and I found this. I was trying to just call free on the temp allocator, but free all is what I needed to be using there. So if I just go back over here to the main game code, and then let's just go shoot. Okay, now I'm in the wrong place. There we go. So over here, I think we just do this and we're good. For some reason my syntax highlighting is busted. I don't know why, but yeah, man, I think that's it, which is pretty sweet, nice and easy.
hash table for us. And now I think we've done all the things that we knew that we had to do that we can remember anyway. So now might be a good time to, again, sort of step in there and see what's going on. Now, there's one more thing, which is I don't know if we ever end the sim. We don't. So what we want to do, oh no, we do. Okay. So what we want to do is just make sure that happens. But it looks like it does happen. Okay. So let's go ahead and do the rest of what we need to do here, which is actually debug this. I'm going to go ahead and just step in right from the start to sort of go through all of our code again and see what happens. Now, we didn't touch the adding code. The adding code still works basically exactly the same way. So I think that should be fine. So I'm going to skip over just the adding code and assume that that's still okay, although maybe we broke something in there as well. We'll find out that we didn't really touch that code much, so I don't think I need to step through it. We'll just debug that code regularly. So what I'll do here is I'll just go ahead and start stepping in right at the point where we actually start the simulation part of things, if that makes sense. So we initialize our arena. This is where we're going to be able to store all the stuff that happens in our sim. Oh, hey, look, we're just at the end. All right, I started 10 minutes late, so really we've got another 10 minutes after the 5-minute warning. So we go into the sim region. Here we go. We're going to get out from our arena. We're going to get the size of the struct. And so now we've got one of these. I don't like the locals window. I'm going to get rid of that. Someone had asked me a question about it separately off stream, and I wanted to double check that the answer I gave them was right. So let's get rid of that. I'm a watch window kind of person. Okay, so we got the sim region. We cleared out our hash table, or at least we think we did. We wouldn't really be able to know until we come around the next time anyway, because it would have been 0 already. But we initialized some stuff inside the sim region. So we set the world pointer. We set the origin to like where we're simulating around. And let's take a look at what that origin actually was. Okay, so the origin is just straight up zeros. We set the bounds, which there we go. That's just our camera, which looks about right. Then we set up our entities, so we're basically going to grab an array with the maximum amount of entities that we wanted to store in the sim region, which we haven't really talked about yet, and we don't really care about at this point. But you know, later on we might do something about that. So we can store up to 4,096 entities in this sim region. And then let's go ahead and take a look here and say, all right, we've got the min chunk P and the max chunk P. That's the region that we're simulating. This is the same code as before, so we're assuming that it still works okay. And I don't think there would be much of a problem with that. Looks like it does. So we iterate over that. We get out our world chunks, and any chunks that have something in it, we're going to go ahead and process. So we're kind of doing that now. And I'd like to take a look. Okay, so we found some entities here in the world. One of our world chunks had some stuff in it. So we're going to go ahead and see what entity it is. It's entity 40. We grab out the stored version of that entity, which is here, which basically has a sim thing in it. It's a wall, or in our case, it's actually a tree, but we haven't really done that stuff in the entities yet. But yeah, it's a wall tree. So we go ahead and figure out where that is relative to our sim region. So let's step into that code. We take where the origin of our world, we make that difference, which looks reasonable, as far as I can tell anyway. And so that becomes our sim space location. We get that out. Once we have it, we check to see whether it's inside the bounds of the camera, which it is. So then we're going to go ahead and add the entity, right? So we come in here. We go ahead and add that entity. And this is our 2-tiered call, the one that takes a position. So it's going to call down to the next tier, which is the lowest level entity addition call. It goes ahead and checks to make sure that we've got room in the sim region for it. We go ahead and grab out whichever one it is and increment that entity count. So we now are storing one entity in our sim region. We're going to initialize the entry in the hash table so that we can get this entity again from its storage index. So again, we go in to do our mapping call. Our mapping call gets that entry, right, which computes the hash value, which right now is just the storage index. We don't do anything fancy there. And we step through our hash table, grabbing out the things one at a time. Now, what I probably should have done, and in fact, since this is the first time into this code, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'll set a breakpoint here. I'll stop the code. I want to go make one change there because I want to be able to inspect those values, and I can't right now because of the way that I typed in the code. I don't like that. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to look at the hash index that we compute after we do this offset process, right? I want to look at that just so I can be able to see it in the debugger, right? And maybe we'll also go one step further and compute that mask separately so I can hand verify that as well. And again, this is just making it so that I can verify my code more easily when I step through it in the debugger and make it easier on myself, because compiler is going to do the substitution of these anyway, so it doesn't really matter how they're set up in that sense. So we're going to make sure we have the hash mask right. We're going to make sure that we have that hash index right. I just want to make sure that those were clear.
I was looking into that stuff regarding the hash map implementation, and I think I am just going to switch to using one of Odin's map types for that, and it'll just be a map, you know, of an int to the sim entity hash, I think, or I don't know. Well, I'll talk more about that later, probably on Monday, after I've had a chance to kind of look at what's going on and make sure that everything's working fine when I do switch over to that type. But that was something that I decided I'm probably going to do. So I have to throw that as a to-do in there somewhere.
Okay. So we go ahead and run back to that point. This is where we were. So our hash mask is like so. Oops. Hash mask. And if we take a look at that, you can see that it masks out the part that we wanted, which is good. And then we compute our hash index, which is also should just be those low bits, 40. It is. Like I said, we started about 10 minutes late, so we'll go about 10 minutes late just to keep with an hour of coding even. All right, so we find a particular entry, and there's nothing in it, right? Which is what we expect. So we go ahead, excuse me, we go ahead and return that out. And so now this person out here now knows that the entry is either 0 or the thing they were looking for. In either case, regardless, it's going to overwrite that storage index because it knows that either it was 0 or the storage that it was expecting. And then it's going to go ahead and put that entity in there. So either it's just overwriting exactly what was already there, or it's going ahead and actually putting in a new one. And so that's fine. Like, we don't care whether it was there or not. We're just going to map it again. So if we actually got back, if we actually got past some entity that we're initializing this entity from, what we want to do is go ahead and overwrite the entity that we just created, all of its data, right? Which should be nothing at this point. All of its data is going to get overwritten with what the data is that we actually had, right? Which is not very much, which is just what that collides, because it's just there's not much data in the trees. And then we want to go ahead and load the stored entity reference if it has one, right? So if it's got a stored in here, we want to load that in as well. So we load that in load entity reference. We look and see if the reference index is non-zero. It's not, so we just go ahead and continue out. We're done adding the entity, and that's all we had to do. So after adding the entity, assuming that we actually were able to add it successfully, we take a look to see whether or not we got a position that we were supposed to set for this guy. We did, so we set it, and now we have set where it is. So that should actually be set to something now, I believe, right? Okay, of course we can't see. It's actually dest. There we go. There's our position. That looks valid. So we're done adding it, and then we're just going to go through and add stuff again. So let's take a look at when we actually add somebody that actually has a sword for that load entity reference. I'll set a breakpoint there. Oh, sorry. No, the sword one is what I wanted. When you actually bring someone into the set, oh, yeah, that's what I wanted. So what we want to do is actually break when that actually becomes true. So that would be load entity reference. It'd be here, right? And so I guess I didn't actually want to run. I didn't mean to run all the way there. So let's go ahead and do that one more time. I just want to set a breakpoint at that one position so that we would be able to look at that piece of the code. All right, so after we add all the entities, and we're done there, right? So now we've got all our entities added. Let's make sure that we have some reasonable values here. We added 95 entities into our sim set for the camera region, which is basically just all the trees, the Monstar, and the familiar, right? So in our sim region, we're going to go ahead and return that out. We then do some regular drawing code, nothing particularly interesting there. We then loop over the entities in this region. Oh, you know what I just realized? We forgot one piece of code already, which is that this entity pointer doesn't get updated. Oops. Oops. That's a bit of an oops. It's true. We made an oops. All right, so this entity pointer right here needs to get updated each time through the loop. Right? We're stepping through that loop. So let's go ahead and recompile that so that we're...
I think I'm already doing that. Let me just make sure. Group stuff. Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I don't know actually if this is the correct way to write this loop, but basically we're just stepping over the entities in the region, and so I think it'll update the memory like we want, hopefully.
Not stepping through a totally bogus version of our code. We don't care about this anymore. We already stepped through that, so we kind of know what's going on in there for now. We'll step back into it when something's broke, once we see what's broke. So now we're stepping through the update code for entities. So we go through here, we switch the entity type, we find that it's a wall. So basically walls just draw stuff, so that's really not that interesting. Here's some update code. We should probably move this to another location. Now that should probably be a move entity, right? So we go ahead and do our standard drawing code. I don't think this really doesn't involve the entity so much. So really what we're looking for is we're probably looking to take, we're probably looking to get into a position where we're actually going to update someone with some kind of logic, right? And the Monstar doesn't have any yet. So let's go ahead and wait till we actually have one of those. So there we go. So if we update familiar, that's actually got some logic to it. So when we come in here, then we have our update familiar call. What we're going to do is say, all right, we're going to loop over all the entities and just see if we can find any heroes. Now we shouldn't find a hero because the player hasn't joined yet. So we shouldn't find a hero, so we should skip over this entirely. And then the move spec, when we pass this DDP, the DDP should be 0, which it is. We come into the move function. We're going to enforce a unit max acceleration vector. That's fine. This is fine. The entity doesn't collide, does it? Or it does collide. It does collide. So now we're testing over all of the entities in the test region, right? So that's pretty straightforward. We're just testing all of those things in the test region. So we'll go ahead and finish that out. We don't have a spatial partition yet, so it's just manually testing them all, which is not very efficient. But again, for only 95 entities, processors are so fast these days, you don't even see it. It's crazy how fast they are. It is crazy how fast computers are. You wouldn't know it if you used a, typical desktop application. You'd be like, how is it managing to be this slow? And somehow they manage. So all right, we go ahead and do update familiar. It was not very interesting. All right, so we've got a problem in, where is this happening? Oh, this is happening at the very end. Wait, so we didn't actually ever hit, oh, that's right, because there's no heroes added. I was like, how come we never saw the hero updates? Like, because we haven't actually joined the game yet. All right, so.
Okay, so it turns out I actually was doing that wrong because the sim region might have a bunch of null entities in it by virtue of the fact that you haven't added, like almost never will we fill all the entities. So I actually had to change this loop and pull the entity pointer out that way up to the count of the actual number of entities in the region. And now maybe we'll get that is canonical assert. I'm not sure. Hopefully. If not, I kind of figured, well, that is different. I kind of figured that there would be some other stuff to sort through just because this has been so much change, but it is the same assert that Casey just tripped, so that bodes very well.
It looks like we stepped through everything except for the end sim, and we're getting an assertion in there anyway, so we kind of know we got to debug that one way or the other. So let's go ahead and finish stepping through everything. Let's step through that end sim. So how is that going to work? So sim entity, we go through, we grab where we're going to store it back to. We do store it back, right? And so that's fine. Then we have to convert our entity references back. So let's go ahead and make sure that that works logically. So we've got stored sim.stored, right? That's, oh, it's got nothing in it, so that doesn't actually matter. It's not going to actually update. We'll have to do that once we actually have a sword, someone with a sword. So then we're going to take a new position by mapping an old position into chunk space, right? So we've got an entity P, which is here as a position. We've got a region origin. We're going to map these in. So when we do the map into chunk space, that will go ahead and do the offset from whatever the base was, and then it'll recanonicalize it. So result, let's see here. So this may just be a bug in our old code, actually. We may not. This may not be an actual bug in our sim region code. We never really even went in here and did a final version. Ugh. Don't get sick, kids. It's not fun. So, inside recanonicalized coordinates, we basically created a thing that's got some offsets to it, and now we want to go ahead and recanonicalize that. So we step in here. What it's going to do is it's going to do that divide to figure out what the integer offset is. The integer offset is 0. It's then going to take a look at that sort of quote-unquote tile index, which is really now a chunk index. We should probably rename these. So what have we got there? That's also 0, so that's not going to change. And then the tile relative version is just going to be whatever it was before minus the adjustment, right? So there it is. And then we're going to take a look and see if that's canonical. In order to be canonical, you've got to be half chunk side in meters, which in this case we are. So somebody who's getting mapped back into this space is in an unhappy situation for some reason, and I'm not sure why. So we'll have to go through, and it looks like, because that looks like it's working properly, so we'll have to see exactly who it is, excuse me, and what's going on with them. All right, so we're getting a non-canonical on this guy. What is the world chunk side in meters? Chunk side in meters is 22. 0.3999996. So this looks like just a sort of, this looks like a float precision bug to me, because the tile relative is right on the edge of that. So I wonder if this was just a case of this not picking up the exact right number to do, right? I mean, you look at these two numbers, they're suspiciously close together. So I feel like this is just a case of the mapping not quite working properly. But at the same time, what I am interested about is that recanonicalize. I'm trying to think if I care about this at all. I don't really think that I do. Let's go out here and check. So back in the stored thing here, we can take a look at the entity structure. Will not have had any mapping done to it, so we can kind of see what we had here. This was the location of the entity 33, -11. And so what we wanted to do is map that back into the chunk space by taking those offsets. So I think what we're seeing here is just a slight error in, basically when you're right on the edge of something that's being mapped in, you just get a little float precision. That's what it looks like to me anyway. Meaning this divide is not perfectly going to round out exactly right. So it looks like it's just that is canonical, has to be a little bit more flexible and allow a little bit further off than exactly on, right? Because that's really, really close to what it should be. So I think that's basically what's going on here. So I'm going to say that we're just going to leave that for now rather than looking into it again, because I'm pretty sure that's what that is, and I don't want to go down the floating point precision rat hole just yet. We already have a to-do in here that talks about that, so I guess what I'd say is we'd need an epsilon here for now, right? Which again isn't great, but you know, we can basically say that, you know, within some precision we're okay if these things are basically a little bit off. So if you basically say, you know, negative plus epsilon, as long as it's pretty close math-wise, we'll treat it that way. And then later on, when we come back through here, we can think about the floating point a little bit more and make sure that we don't have, you know, that we are as accurate as possible. All right. So surprisingly, that actually looks like it's sort of working. Let's go.
Do I have the same result? What the hell is going on here? You are mad because this is not a float. Okay. Moment of truth. Did we do all of the things right over the past, like, 3 days? No, we did not. So anticlimactic. We're hitting this assert here. I don't really know if we care that much. We'll just try and go for it. We'll pull out those asserts. Nope. We're hitting something else. So this is going to be very painful, probably. If I don't find out what I did wrong in the first 5 to 10 minutes of looking at this problem, it could very well take me 5 to 10 hours. Who knows? It may be a thing that I spend all of Monday debugging if I can't make time to figure this out, because that is messed up, right? It could be just like some pointer stuff gone haywire, right? Because we have, we're passing in an old and new P. I don't know. Like, there was that whole aspect of the move entity code, pulling out this call. So, yeah, unfortunately, I have to stop here, and I can't press on. But maybe, because Casey, I think, debugs here for a few more minutes, and then we maybe get some closure on some parts of this. But that is not, his build and ran, thankfully. So he's in the clear. But damn, things were looking so good. I was so optimistic, honestly, that we were hitting the same assert before. But now that we're not, it's a crapshoot. So I'll be back Monday, and hopefully I'll have this figured out. If not, we'll spend some time trying to figure it out on stream. But if I have figured it out, then we'll jump into day 66, where we'll work on some of the to-dos that he has already talked about during today's episode regarding like the spatial partitioning and some of this other stuff like clearing the hash. Well, I guess he already did that, so never mind. But we definitely still have to do the spatial, or I guess non-spatial, handling non-spatial entities. Is that what that is? I can't see the whole title. Anyway, so we'll keep pressing on, and it'll be a little bit painful, but we'll get there. So have a good weekend, and I will see you whenever I see you again.